My daughter Madison slammed her hand on the granite dining table and screamed, "Shut up, Dad! Nobody cares what you think. You're just a spare part in this house, so finish your food and go to your room." The wine glass in front of me trembled from the impact. My son-in-law Griffin smirked behind his napkin like he was watching his favorite TV show. My 16-year-old grandson Oliver didn't even bother looking up from his iPhone, just snickered as he typed away. Now let me tell you something about respect. For 68 years, I've lived by a simple code. You treat people with dignity, and you expect the same in return. I spent 35 years as Vice President of Sales for Advanced Medical Solutions, managing teams of over 200 people. I closed deals with major hospital systems across the Southwest. I've negotiated with CEOs, dealt with hostile takeovers, and survived 3 recessions. But I had never, not once in my entire life, been told to shut up in my own home. My name is Wesley Pierce, and this is the story of how I got my life back. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my plate across the room like some Hollywood drama. I didn't even raise my voice. You know what I did? I simply looked at Madison, really looked at her. This was the woman I'd held in my arms the day she was born, the little girl who used to beg me to read her bedtime stories, the young woman whose private college education cost me more than most people's houses. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet I'd bought her mother for our 25th wedding anniversary. I stood up slowly. The mahogany chair legs scraped against the hardwood floor, a sound that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. I straightened my blazer, took one last look around that dining room, and walked out. And here's the thing that'll probably surprise you. I never went back. But let me back up and tell you how we got to this point, because nobody just snaps overnight. This was years in the making. Earlier that afternoon, I was sitting in my study, the one room in the house that still felt like mine, staring at a piece of paper that made my blood pressure spike. It was the monthly statement for the American Express Platinum card I'd foolishly authorized for Madison. The balance? $8,500, and that was just for 30 days. You want to know what $8,500 buys you these days? Personal trainer sessions at some fancy Scottsdale studio, a weekend wellness retreat in Sedona where they probably served her kale smoothies and told her she was finding herself, and 3 designer handbags from the Fashion Square Mall. 3 handbags in 1 month. I picked up my Mont Blanc pen, the heavy one my late wife Charlotte gave me for our 30th anniversary, and signed a check for $2,800. This was for tonight's catering bill. Madison was hosting what she called a vision board party for her wellness coaching clients. She needed to impress potential investors for her latest business venture, something about selling essential oils and life coaching to wealthy housewives who had nothing better to do. Here's what really gets me. She told me I was paying for it because it was my contribution to supporting her entrepreneurial spirit. Entrepreneurial spirit. The woman had never held a real job for longer than 6 months in her entire 35 years of life. I placed that check in its envelope and looked around my study. This room had become my sanctuary, the last place in the house where I could think clearly. You see, this house sits right on the 15th fairway of Desert Mountain Golf Club in Scottsdale. It's worth $1.8 million, and I bought it with cash 8 years ago when Charlotte and I moved from Minnesota. We were going to spend our golden years playing golf, traveling, maybe finally taking that European river cruise we'd always talked about. But Charlotte never got to see those golden years. The cancer took her just 3 years after we moved in. And here's where the story gets really pathetic. I don't even sleep in the master bedroom anymore. 3 years ago, right around the time Griffin lost his 4th job in 2 years, Madison informed me that they needed more space. They claimed my sleep apnea machine was keeping them awake, even though their bedroom was clear down the hallway from mine. So what did I do? I moved my things into the guest room next to the kitchen. It's smaller, darker, with just one window that looks out at the driveway instead of the golf course. They took the master suite with its private balcony and jacuzzi tub. They took the room where Charlotte had spent her final months, where we'd watched sunrises together when she was too weak to get out of bed. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself that family helps family, that a man provides for his children no matter what. I told myself a lot of stupid things that seemed reasonable at the time. Now I know better. I wasn't keeping the peace. I was funding my own humiliation. You know how it is when you're slowly getting used to disrespect? It doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual, like water wearing down a stone. First, it's little things. They don't say thank you when you pay their bills. Then it's bigger things. They interrupt you when you're speaking. Before you know it, you're living like a ghost in your own house, apologizing for taking up space you paid for. But every man has his breaking point. Mine just happened to involve a dinner table and the words spare part. I checked my watch. It was 6:30 p.m., and I could already hear the catering staff setting up in the dining room. The sound of clinking silverware and Madison's sharp voice directing them around like a general commanding troops. She was probably wearing that $1,500 silk dress I'd seen the receipt for last month, another business expense for her wellness coaching empire. Now let me tell you about Griffin Wells, my son-in-law. This is a 38-year-old man who calls himself a cryptocurrency consultant. In the 9 years he's been married to my daughter, yeah, you heard that right, 9 years, he started exactly 4 different crypto ventures. Want to guess how many have turned a profit? If you said 0, congratulations. You understand basic math better than Griffin does. The man has a business card that lists his occupation as blockchain innovation specialist. I've seen it. It's printed on expensive cardstock with gold lettering. The kind of card that costs more to print than most people make in a day. And here's the kicker. I paid for those cards. Last month, Griffin approached me with his latest opportunity. He needed $45,000 for something called a DeFi liquidity pool optimization protocol. I swear he makes these names up by throwing cryptocurrency buzzwords at a wall and seeing what sticks. When I told him no, actually used that 2-letter word that seemed to shock him to his core, he stopped speaking to me entirely. For 3 weeks, this grown man has been walking past me in my own hallway like I'm invisible. You know what that's like? Having someone pretend you don't exist in your own home? It's like being a ghost, except ghosts probably get more respect. I stood up from my desk and straightened my tie. Call it old-fashioned, but I still dress for dinner. It's one of those habits from my corporate days that I can't shake. Dignity is a discipline, my father used to say, and some disciplines are worth keeping even when the world around you has forgotten what they mean. The kitchen smelled amazing when I walked in. Herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, some kind of fancy bread that probably cost more per pound than most people spend on groceries for a week. Madison was there in her silk dress, inspecting a cheese board like she was a food critic for the New York Times. She looked up at me with those calculating eyes. "Dad, try not to embarrass us tonight," she said, her voice carrying that special tone of condescension she'd perfected over the years. "My wellness coaching clients are coming, plus some potential investors from the yoga studio. Just eat your dinner and then maybe watch TV in your room or something." Here's what I wanted to say. This is my house, Madison. These people are eating food I paid for, drinking wine from my cellar, sitting on furniture I bought. I built the wealth that's funding this little fantasy dinner party of yours. Here's what I actually said. I nodded. That's it. Just nodded like some senile old man who couldn't be trusted to speak in front of company. You want to know why I did that? Because somewhere along the way, I'd been trained, like a dog. I'd been conditioned to believe that keeping the peace was more important than keeping my dignity, that being a good father meant being a quiet father, that providing for your family meant providing everything, money, housing, food, cars, and even your own silence. I walked into the dining room where the table was set with Charlotte's grandmother's china, the good stuff, the plates we used to save for holidays and special occasions. Now they were just Tuesday night dinnerware for Madison's latest networking event. Griffin was already seated naturally. He was wearing a navy blazer that I'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago, pouring himself a generous glass of the 2015 Cabernet I'd been saving for a special occasion. He didn't ask if I wanted any, didn't even acknowledge my existence, just filled his glass to the rim like he was at an open bar. My grandson Oliver was slouched in his chair wearing those wireless earbuds that seem permanently attached to teenagers these days. 16 years old, and already he'd learned the family tradition of treating his grandfather like hired help. "Take those off," Madison snapped as she sat down. Oliver rolled his eyes, another family tradition, and pulled out one earbud, letting it dangle around his neck like some kind of technological jewelry. The music was still playing, a tinny, annoying sound that nobody seemed to notice except me. "So," Griffin said, taking what I can only describe as an aggressive gulp of my wine, "I've got a meeting with some venture capital guys on Monday. This new DeFi protocol I'm developing is going to completely revolutionize peer-to-peer lending. We're talking unicorn status within 24 months. Wesley, you really should reconsider getting in on the ground floor before it's too late." I cut my salmon. It was overcooked. I'd paid $20,800 for overcooked fish. I think I'll stick with my index funds, Griffin, I said as calmly as I could manage. I checked my watch. It was 6:30 p.m., and I could already hear the catering staff setting up in the dining room. The sound of clinking silverware and Madison's sharp voice directing them around like a general commanding troops. She was probably wearing that $1,500 silk dress I'd seen the receipt for last month, another business expense for her wellness coaching empire. Now, let me tell you about Griffin Wells, my son-in-law. This is a 38-year-old man who calls himself a cryptocurrency consultant. In the 9 years he's been married to my daughter, yeah, you heard that right, 9 years, he started exactly 4 different crypto ventures. Want to guess how many have turned a profit? If you said 0, congratulations. You understand basic math better than Griffin does. The man has a business card that lists his occupation as blockchain innovation specialist. I've seen it. It's printed on expensive cardstock with gold lettering, the kind of card that costs more to print than most people make in a day. And here's the kicker. I paid for those cards. Last month, Griffin approached me with his latest opportunity. He needed $45,000 for something called a DeFi liquidity pool optimization protocol. I swear he makes these names up by throwing cryptocurrency buzzwords at a wall and seeing what sticks. When I told him no, actually used that 2-letter word that seemed to shock him to his core, he stopped speaking to me entirely. For 3 weeks, this grown man has been walking past me in my own hallway like I'm invisible. You know what that's like? Having someone pretend you don't exist in your own home? It's like being a ghost, except ghosts probably get more respect. I stood up from my desk and straightened my tie. Call it old-fashioned, but I still dress for dinner. It's one of those habits from my corporate days that I can't shake. Dignity is a discipline, my father used to say, and some disciplines are worth keeping even when the world around you has forgotten what they mean. The kitchen smelled amazing when I walked in. Herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, some kind of fancy bread that probably cost more per pound than most people spend on groceries for a week. Madison was there in her silk dress, inspecting a cheese board like she was a food critic for the New York Times. She looked up at me with those calculating eyes. "Dad, try not to embarrass us tonight," she said, her voice carrying that special tone of condescension she'd perfected over the years. "My wellness coaching clients are coming, plus some potential investors from the yoga studio. Just eat your dinner and then maybe watch TV in your room or something." Here's what I wanted to say. This is my house, Madison. These people are eating food I paid for, drinking wine from my cellar, sitting on furniture I bought. I built the wealth that's funding this little fantasy dinner party of yours. Here's what I actually said. I nodded. That's it. Just nodded like some senile old man who couldn't be trusted to speak in front of company. You want to know why I did that? Because somewhere along the way, I'd been trained. Like a dog. I'd been conditioned to believe that keeping the peace was more important than keeping my dignity. That being a good father meant being a quiet father. That providing for your family meant providing everything: money, housing, food, cars, and even your own silence. I walked into the dining room where the table was set with Charlotte's grandmother's china. The good stuff. The plates we used to save for holidays and special occasions. Now they were just Tuesday night dinnerware for Madison's latest networking event. Griffin was already seated naturally. He was wearing a navy blazer that I'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago, pouring himself a generous glass of the 2015 Cabernet I'd been saving for a special occasion. He didn't ask if I wanted any, didn't even acknowledge my existence. Just filled his glass to the rim like he was at an open bar. My grandson Oliver was slouched in his chair wearing those wireless earbuds that seem permanently attached to teenagers these days. 16 years old, and already he'd learned the family tradition of treating his grandfather like hired help. "Take those off," Madison snapped as she sat down. Oliver rolled his eyes, another family tradition, and pulled out one earbud, letting it dangle around his neck like some kind of technological jewelry. The music was still playing, a tinny, annoying sound that nobody seemed to notice except me. "So," Griffin said, taking what I can only describe as an aggressive gulp of my wine, "I've got a meeting with some venture capital guys on Monday. This new DeFi protocol I'm developing is going to completely revolutionize peer-to-peer lending. We're talking unicorn status within 24 months. Wesley, you really should reconsider getting in on the ground floor before it's too late." I cut my salmon. It was overcooked. I'd paid $2,800 for overcooked fish. "I think I'll stick with my index funds, Griffin," I said as calmly as I could manage. He looked at his mother for backup, expecting her to jump in and defend his behavior like she always did. Madison was sipping her wine, studying her manicure with the detached interest of someone watching paint dry. "Dad, just leave him alone," Madison said without even looking up. "He's 16. Teenagers aren't known for their manners. And honestly, Isabella is getting clumsy in her old age. Maybe it's time we found someone younger." That comment hit me like a physical blow. Isabella, who had cared for my dying wife. Isabella, who worked 2 jobs to support her family. Isabella, who had more integrity in her pinky finger than the 3 of them had combined. And Madison was talking about replacing her like she was a broken appliance. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. This was the woman I'd carried on my shoulders at Disney World when she was 5. The woman I'd walked down the aisle at her wedding, proud as any father could be. The woman whose student loans I'd paid off so she could start her adult life debt-free. "Madison," I said, my voice steady but carrying a warning, "you're raising a spoiled brat. If you don't correct this behavior now, Oliver is going to grow up to be exactly like his stepfather." The temperature in that room dropped about 20 degrees. Griffin's face turned an interesting shade of purple that probably isn't found in nature. He slammed his wine glass down so hard I was surprised it didn't shatter against the table. "Hey, watch your mouth, old man," he said, pointing at me with a finger that was shaking with rage. "You're living in our house now. You should show some respect. Our house." Those 2 words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Let me explain something to you about ownership. My name is on the deed to this property. My signature is on the mortgage papers. Well, was, since I paid it off in full 3 years ago. My bank account funded every square foot of this place, every piece of furniture, every blade of grass and that perfectly manicured lawn outside. But somehow, in the twisted logic that had taken over my family, this had become their house. I was just some elderly tenant they were generously allowing to stay, out of the goodness of their hearts. "This house is in my name, Griffin," I said, my voice getting colder with each word. "I bought it with cash. I pay the property taxes that keep you from being homeless. I pay the electricity bill that powers your cryptocurrency mining operation in the garage. I pay for the food you're eating right now." I gestured around the room with my fork. "You are guests here. Permanent guests who have apparently forgotten that hospitality works both ways. Now here's what I expected to happen next. Griffin would back down, maybe offer some kind of half-hearted apology. Madison would play peacekeeper, suggest we all calm down and finish dinner. Oliver would go back to his phone and pretend the adult conversation wasn't happening. Here's what actually happened. Madison stood up from her chair like she was rising from a throne. Her face was twisted with a rage I'd never seen before, not even during her worst teenage tantrums. "Shut up, Dad!" she screamed. The words came out of her mouth like bullets from a gun. "Just shut up. I am so sick of listening to your arrogant lectures about money and respect and all your outdated ideas about how families should work." She was gesturing wildly now, her diamond bracelet catching the light from the chandelier. The same chandelier I'd bought when we first moved into this house, thinking it would make Charlotte happy to have something beautiful to look at during dinner. "Nobody cares what you think anymore," Madison continued, her voice getting shriller with each word. "You're just a spare part in this house, a leftover from a different generation that doesn't understand how the world works now." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, not hurt. Something much more dangerous. Absolute clarity. "We only keep you around because we feel sorry for you," she went on, apparently not done destroying what was left of our relationship. "You're a lonely, bitter old man who can't accept that his time is over. So finish your overpriced dinner, go to your little room, and stay there. Stop pretending you have any authority in this house." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Oliver had looked up from his phone, his mouth slightly open like he couldn't believe what he'd just witnessed. Griffin was smirking behind his napkin again, clearly enjoying the show. I looked at Madison, I looked at Griffin, I looked at Oliver, who was already pulling his earbuds back in, apparently deciding that this family drama wasn't worth his attention. And you know what I realized in that moment? I wasn't looking at family. I was looking at strangers. Strangers who happened to share my DNA and my address, but strangers nonetheless. For years, I'd been afraid of being alone, terrified of it, actually. I'd tolerated disrespect, absorbed financial abuse, accepted contempt, all because I thought anything was better than solitude. But sitting there in that dining room, surrounded by people who saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM, I realized something profound. I was already alone. I'd been alone since the day Charlotte died. These people weren't my family. They were tenants who had forgotten the terms of their lease and apparently thought they owned the place. I didn't say a word in response to Madison's tirade. You know what I did instead? I stood up. Slowly, deliberately, like a man who had finally made up his mind about something important. I smoothed down my blazer. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate of overcooked salmon. "Where are you going?" Madison demanded, her voice still carrying that shrill edge of hysteria. "Don't you dare walk away when I'm talking to you." I looked at her one last time. "I'm going out," I said simply. And then I walked out of that dining room for the last time. Now let me tell you what I did next, because this is where the story gets interesting. I walked straight down the hallway to my study and closed the door behind me. I could hear their voices getting louder in the dining room. Madison shrieking something about disrespect, Griffin mumbling agreement, Oliver probably asking if he could leave the table. I went to my wall safe, the one hidden behind the vintage Mustang painting. You know the combination? Charlotte's birthday, 041852. Inside that safe were my important papers, some emergency cash, gold coins I'd been collecting since the 1990s, and a thick manila folder I'd labeled Plan B. I'd put together that folder 18 months ago, right around the time I started noticing money disappearing from our joint checking account. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $500 there. Nothing dramatic enough to cause alarm, but consistent enough to show a pattern. I'm a sales guy, remember? I notice patterns. That folder contained everything I'd need to disappear from this situation. Account numbers for investments Madison didn't know existed, contact information for Preston Ford, my attorney and the smartest legal mind in Arizona, and most importantly, documentation of every penny I'd spent supporting this family over the past decade. Let me share those numbers with you because they tell a story all by themselves. Monthly credit card payments averaging $8,500 for the past 2 years. That's $204,000 right there. Griffin's car lease payments, $1,200 a month for 3 years. Oliver's private school tuition at Scottsdale Prep, $28,000 annually. Madison's business investments, and I use that term loosely, totaling roughly $150,000 over 5 years. Add in the mortgage payments I made before paying off the house, utilities, insurance, property taxes, groceries, Madison's spa treatments, Griffin's poker losses that I quietly covered, Oliver's gaming equipment, family vacations to places I didn't want to go. The grand total? Just over $3.2 million spent supporting 3 people who had just told me I was a spare part in my own home. You want to know something about business? In business, when you invest that kind of money in something and get nothing but contempt in return, you call it a loss and you cut your ties. You don't keep throwing good money after bad just because you're emotionally attached to the failing venture. I took that folder, I took my passport, I took the spare keys to my Lincoln Navigator. I looked around my study one last time, at the photos of Charlotte and me in happier times, at the awards from my sales career, at the books I'd collected over the years. There was one photo of Madison on my desk, taken at her college graduation. She was smiling, wearing her cap and gown, looking like she had the whole world ahead of her. I'd been so proud that day. I thought I was raising a strong, independent woman who would make her mark on the world. I left that photo where it was. I unlocked my study door and walked toward the front entrance. The voices from the dining room had gotten louder. I could make out fragments of conversation, probably having some kind of senior moment. Thinks he can just storm off like a teenager. He'll be back in an hour, apologizing. Griffin's voice was the clearest. The old man has nowhere else to go. He's too scared and too old to function on his own. This is just a tantrum. He'll come crawling back by bedtime. I paused at the front door and looked at the keys in my hand. The brass key for the front door, the silver key for the back gate, the garage door remote, the alarm system fob. These small pieces of metal represented control over this house, access to this property, ownership of this space. Madison appeared in the dining room doorway, probably wondering why I was taking so long to slink back to my room in shame. "Dad, where do you think you're going?" she called out. "You can't drive at night. Your eyesight is terrible." Here's something she didn't know. I'd had cataract surgery 8 months earlier. My vision was better than it had been in years. I just never mentioned it because I didn't want to become their personal chauffeur for shopping trips and yoga classes. I told you. I'm going out, I said calmly. Don't be ridiculous, she huffed, walking toward me. Come back inside right now. If you leave like this, don't expect me to wait up for you. I looked at those keys in my hand one more time. I looked at the manicured front lawn that cost me $800 a month to maintain. I looked at the house that was supposed to be my legacy, my retirement dream, the place where Charlotte and I were going to grow old together. You don't have to worry about waiting up, Madison, I said quietly. Then I did something that felt more liberating than anything I'd done in years. I raised my arm and threw those keys as hard as I could. They sailed through the desert air in a perfect arc, catching the light from the porch fixtures, and landed with a satisfying crash somewhere deep in the oleander bushes that lined our driveway. Madison's gasp was audible from 20 feet away. What are you doing? She shrieked. Have you completely lost your mind? Pick those up right now. But I was already walking toward my navigator. You know that feeling when you make a decision that changes everything? When you cross a line you can never uncross? That's what this felt like. Every step toward my car was a step away from the last 9 years of humiliation and financial abuse. I got in, started the engine, and felt the V6 purr to life beneath me. It's a beautiful sound. The sound of 400 horsepower and unlimited possibilities. Through the windshield, I could see Madison standing in the doorway, screaming something I couldn't hear through the soundproof glass. I didn't strain to listen. I didn't roll down the window to catch her last words. I simply put the car in reverse and backed out of that driveway for the final time. Here's what I bet you're thinking. Wesley, where exactly did you go at 9 o'clock on a Friday night? Great question. I drove straight to the Scottsdale Princess Resort, one of the nicest hotels in Arizona. You know why I chose the Princess? Because I've been a member of their executive club for 15 years. Because they know me there. Because they treat their guests with something my own family had forgotten existed. Respect. I pulled up to the valet stand and a young man in a crisp uniform immediately opened my door. Good evening, Mr. Pierce, he said with a genuine smile. Welcome back to the Princess. That's right, he knew my name. A hotel employee showed me more courtesy in 10 seconds than my own family had shown me in months. Keep it close, son, I told him, handing over the keys. I might need it in the morning. The lobby of the Princess is all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, the kind of understated luxury that whispers rather than shouts. I walked to the front desk where the night manager recognized me immediately. Mr. Pierce, what a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting you tonight. I need a suite, I said. The Desert Mountain Suite, if it's available, for an indefinite period. Certainly, sir. And would you like me to arrange dinner service to your room? The kitchen is still open. The best steak you have, I said. And send up a bottle of your finest scotch. I'm celebrating. Celebrating, sir? I thought about that for a moment. What exactly was I celebrating? The end of a relationship with my daughter? The collapse of my family? The revelation that I'd been funding my own abuse for nearly a decade? My independence, I said finally. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a leather armchair overlooking the city lights of Scottsdale, eating a perfectly prepared ribeye and sipping 25-year-old Macallan. The steak was tender enough to cut with a fork. The scotch burned in all the right ways. For the first time in years, I was eating food I hadn't paid someone else to cook for someone else to enjoy. My phone started buzzing around 10 p.m. Text messages, voicemails, all from Madison's number. Where are you? This isn't funny anymore. Dad, pick up the phone. You're acting like a child. Griffin thinks you might be having some kind of episode. Answer me right now. I read each message as it came in. And you know what I felt? Nothing. No guilt, no anxiety, no urge to rush back and smooth things over. Just a cold, clinical detachment like I was reading someone else's drama. Instead of responding, I opened my contacts and scrolled down to a name I hadn't called in months. Preston Ford. Preston has been my attorney for 30 years, ever since I first started making real money in medical sales. He's also one of the few people I'd consider a genuine friend. The phone rang twice before his gravelly voice answered. Wesley, it's 10:30 on a Friday night. Please tell me nobody died. Not yet, I said, taking another sip of scotch. But the old Wesley Pierce just had his funeral. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Preston is a smart man, and smart men know when to listen carefully. What happened? They finally pushed too far, Preston. Madison told me to shut up at my own dinner table, called me a spare part in my own house. Another pause. Then Preston let out a low, dangerous chuckle that I remembered from our poker games. "So we're finally going nuclear?" Preston asked, and I could hear him settling into his chair. Preston has been waiting for this call for years. He's watched Madison and Griffin bleed me dry with the patience of a man who knows that every financial parasite eventually pushes their host too far. "Phase 1, I said, swirling the scotch in my glass. "I want you to cut off their oxygen supply." "The credit cards?" "All of them. Every supplementary card linked to my accounts. Report them as compromised. I want the terminals to scream 'declined' when they try to buy a pack of gum." "Consider it done," Preston said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "What about the joint accounts? Freeze them. Transfer everything into the trust accounts they don't know about." Now let me explain something about financial planning. When you've been in sales as long as I have, you learn to protect your assets. 3 years ago, when I first noticed money disappearing from our checking account, I set up separate investment accounts that only I controlled. Nothing illegal, nothing hidden from the IRS, just smart asset protection. Madison and Griffin thought they had access to everything I owned. They were wrong. They had access to the allowance I gave them, which they'd apparently confused with an inheritance. "The utilities?" Preston asked. "Cancel them. All of them. Tell the electric company that the owner has vacated the premises and any further service is unauthorized. Wesley, it's going to be 95 degrees tomorrow." "Are you sure about this?" I thought about Madison calling me a spare part. I thought about Griffin claiming ownership of my house. I thought about Oliver treating Isabella like dirt. "I'm sure," I said. "Let them sweat." "What about the house itself?" This was the nuclear option. 6 months ago, when Madison first started getting really nasty about my outdated ideas, I'd executed something called a life estate deed. It's a legal instrument that allows you to transfer ownership of property while retaining the right to live there until death. I'd sold the house to Spencer Hayes Property Management for a substantial sum, but kept the legal right to occupy it for life. The beauty of the arrangement was a specific clause I'd insisted on. If the life tenant voluntarily abandons the property for more than 48 hours, the life estate terminates immediately and full ownership reverts to the buyer. When I threw those keys into the bushes and drove away, I'd triggered that clause. "Call Hayes," I told Preston. "Tell him the abandonment period starts now. In 48 hours, he owns a house with 3 very surprised tenants." Preston was quiet for a moment. "Wesley, once we do this, there's no going back. Madison will be homeless." "Madison will learn what it's like to earn her own roof over her head," I corrected. "She's 35 years old. It's past time." After I hung up with Preston, I sat back in my leather chair and watched the city lights twinkle below. Somewhere out there, about 20 miles north, my former family was probably arguing about what to do next. Griffin was likely assuring Madison that I'd come crawling back by morning. Madison was probably working herself into a rage about my disrespectful behavior. They had no idea that their world was about to collapse. My phone buzzed with another text message. "Dad, this is getting ridiculous. Come home right now. We need to talk like adults." I almost laughed. Now she wanted to talk like adults, after years of treating me like a senile old fool who couldn't be trusted to express an opinion at his own dinner table. I poured myself another scotch and called room service. "This is Mr. Pierce in the Desert Mountain Suite. I'd like to order your chocolate lava cake and a pot of your Colombian coffee." "Certainly, sir. Will there be anything else?" "No, that's perfect. You know what was perfect? Ordering dessert at 11 p.m. without someone lecturing me about my blood sugar or telling me I shouldn't eat so late or rolling their eyes at my old man habits." While I waited for dessert, I opened the security camera app on my iPad. Yes, I had security cameras throughout the house. I'd installed them 2 years ago after noticing cash disappearing from my wallet. Madison and Griffin thought they were just standard outdoor security cameras. They had no idea I could monitor the interior of the house from anywhere in the world. The house was still lit up, all the windows glowing yellow against the desert darkness. I could see movement in the kitchen, Madison pacing back and forth, probably wearing out the tile with her designer heels. The dining room was empty. the remnants of our disastrous dinner still scattered across Charlotte's grandmother's china. At 11:47 p.m., I watched Griffin walk out to the driveway with a flashlight. He was looking for the keys I'd thrown into the bushes. It took him almost 20 minutes of searching through the oleander before he found them, even from the camera angle. I could see his relief when the brass caught the light from his flashlight beam. He held the keys up triumphantly, probably thinking he'd solved the crisis. Poor Griffin. He thought this was about keys. The room service arrived exactly on time. Perfect chocolate cake, rich Colombian coffee, and service with a smile. I tipped the young man $20 just because I could. Because it was my money, and I could spend it on whatever made me happy. As I ate that cake, every single bite of it, I thought about the last time I'd enjoyed dessert without guilt. It had been years. Madison was always making comments about my weight, my health, my poor dietary choices. Griffin would lecture me about sugar and inflammation and whatever health trend he'd read about online. Tonight, I ate cake at midnight like a free man. My phone rang at 12:30 a.m., Madison again. This time I answered, just to hear what she had to say. "Dad, thank God," she said, her voice breathless with relief. "Where are you?" Griffin found the keys. "Just come home and we'll forget this whole thing happened." "I'm at a hotel, Madison." "Which hotel?" "I'll come get you. You shouldn't be driving this late." "I'm not coming home," I said quietly. There was a long pause. "What do you mean you're not coming home?" "Don't be dramatic, Dad. You're upset. I get it. But running away isn't the solution." "I'm not running away," I said. "I'm moving on." "What do you mean, moving on?" Madison's voice was getting that sharp edge again, the one that came out whenever she didn't get her way immediately. "I mean exactly what I said. I'm 68 years old, Madison. I'm too old to waste any more time on people who don't value me." "Dad, you're being ridiculous." So we had a little argument at dinner. Families fight sometimes. That's normal. A little argument, that's what she called it. Madison telling me to shut up, calling me a spare part, ordering me to my room like I was a misbehaving child. That was just a little argument in her mind. This wasn't a fight, Madison. This was you showing me exactly how you really feel about your father. And you know what? I believe you. I was upset, okay? I said some things I didn't mean. People say stupid things when they're angry. Here's what I've learned about apologies over the years. The good ones involve taking responsibility. The bad ones involve explaining why the other person shouldn't be upset. Madison's apology was definitely in the second category. "Madison, you told me to shut up in my own home. You called me a spare part. You ordered me to my room. Those weren't things you said because you were angry. Those were things you said because that's how you see me." There was a long pause. I could hear voices in the background, Griffin saying something about handling me. "Dad, just come home. We can work this out." "No," I said simply. "We can't." I hung up the phone and turned it off. For the first time in years, I slept like a baby. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of brutal Arizona sunshine that can bake a man's brain if he's not careful. I woke up at 7 a.m. feeling more refreshed than I had in months. Room service brought me fresh coffee, eggs Benedict, and sliced fruit that actually tasted like fruit instead of cardboard. While I ate breakfast on my balcony, watching golfers on the resort course below, I opened the security app on my iPad. Time for the morning show. The house looked different in daylight, quieter somehow, even though I could see movement through the windows. Madison was in the kitchen wearing yesterday's silk dress, looking like she'd slept in it. She was standing at the coffee machine, pressing buttons with increasing frustration. You see, I'd been the one making coffee every morning for the past 5 years. I'd get up at 6 a.m., grind the beans, prepare the machine, and have a fresh pot ready by the time she dragged herself out of bed at 10. It was just another invisible service she'd come to expect. This morning, the machine was cold and empty. I watched her open cabinet after cabinet, searching for the coffee beans. She wouldn't find any. I'd emptied them all into the garbage before I left, along with the filters and the cream she liked. Petty? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. At 8:47 a.m., exactly as Preston had promised, the first phase went live. Madison walked to the front door where Rodriguez, our landscaper, was standing with his hat in his hand. Every Saturday morning for the past 3 years, I'd left an envelope with $400 cash under the doormat. This morning, there was no envelope. I turned up the volume on my iPad to catch their conversation. Good morning, Mrs. Pierce. I'm looking for the payment envelope. My father isn't here right now, Madison said, clearly flustered. Can you come back next week? Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, I finished the irrigation repair on Thursday. That was a big job. I need to pay my crew today. Madison huffed and went back inside. I watched her grab her purse and pull out the black American Express Centurion card, the one with no preset spending limit, the one connected directly to my primary account, the one Preston had reported as stolen at 8:30 a.m. Rodriguez had a square card reader attached to his phone. Madison handed him the black card with the confidence of someone who'd never had a transaction declined in her adult life. He swiped it, frowned, swiped it again. I'm sorry, ma'am. It's not going through. That's impossible, Madison said, her voice rising. That card has no limit. Try it again. I did try it again. It says pickup card and contact issuer. I leaned forward in my hotel chair, savoring my Colombian coffee. Preston worked fast. Here, try this one, Madison said, handing him a Visa. Declined. This one, she said, producing a MasterCard. Also declined. Rodriguez put his equipment away. Ma'am, I'll have to come back when you have cash. And I'll need to take the fertilizer spreader I left in your garage. Company policy. You can't take equipment. Madison protested. We'll pay you next week. Sorry, ma'am. No payment, no equipment. I watched him walk to his truck and drive away, taking with him the professional landscaping service that kept our property looking like something from Better Homes and Gardens. Madison stood in the driveway for a full minute, staring at the declined credit cards in her hand like they were artifacts from an alien civilization. Then she pulled out her phone and called me. I didn't answer. At 9:15 a.m., Griffin emerged from the house wearing gym shorts and a t-shirt, looking like he'd been dragged through a hedge backwards. He walked to his Tesla Model S, the one leased in my name because his credit score was somewhere between poor and fictional character. He pressed the unlock button on his key fob. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, harder this time, like the problem was insufficient button pressure. Still nothing. Tesla has a wonderful feature called Remote Access Disable. When the primary account holder reports possible unauthorized use, they can lock the vehicle remotely until the situation is resolved. I'd called Tesla at 8 a.m. and reported the car as possibly compromised. Griffin tried the door handle, locked tight. He walked around the car, trying every door, his frustration mounting with each failed attempt. Then he did something that made me actually laugh out loud. He kicked the front tire. Immediately, he grabbed his foot and started hopping around the driveway like a man dancing on hot coals. While Griffin was having his tantrum in the driveway, something interesting was happening inside the house. Madison was trying to use the desktop computer in my study to check our bank accounts online. The screen showed what I knew it would show. Account balance, $0. Every liquid asset I'd accumulated over 35 years in medical sales, the money they thought belonged to them as much as it belonged to me, had been moved into trust accounts they didn't know existed. Madison's scream was audible through the closed windows of the house. At 10:30 a.m., the power went out. I'd called Arizona Public Service at 8 a.m. and canceled the electrical service. The account holder, me, had vacated the premises, and any further electrical service was unauthorized. Within minutes, the air conditioning died. The refrigerator stopped humming. The Wi-Fi router went dark. In Arizona, in July, losing air conditioning isn't just an inconvenience. It's a countdown timer to misery. Let me tell you something about Arizona heat in July. When it's 105 degrees outside and your air conditioning dies, the temperature inside your house starts climbing fast. Within an hour, it was probably 85 degrees in there. Within 2 hours, it would hit 95. By evening, they'd be living in an oven. I watched through the security cameras as Madison ran from room to room, flipping light switches that did nothing. She tried the ceiling fans, she tried the TV, nothing. Oliver appeared in the kitchen, holding his phone up toward the ceiling like he was trying to capture some mythical signal. "The Wi-Fi is down!" I could see him shouting, though I couldn't hear him through the cameras. Griffin was outside, standing next to his locked Tesla, talking on his phone, probably calling the leasing company, trying to figure out why his car had suddenly turned into a very expensive paperweight. At 11 a.m., my phone rang. It was Madison again. "Dad, the power is out," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, "and our credit cards aren't working. Something's wrong with the bank accounts." "I know," I said simply. "You know?" What do you mean, you know? I mean I know because I'm the one who canceled everything. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. You... what? Madison, you called me a spare part. You told me I was just taking up space in my own house. So I decided to show you what happens when the spare part stops working. Dad, you can't do this. It's 100 degrees outside. We can't live without air conditioning. Then I suggest you find somewhere else to live. This is insane. You're having some kind of breakdown. I'm calling Dr. Peterson. I'm having you committed. That threat hit me like a slap. Madison was talking about having me declared mentally incompetent, stripped of my rights, locked away in some facility where I'd die forgotten and alone. All so she could get her hands on my assets. You do that, Madison. You call Dr. Peterson. But before you do, you might want to ask him about his gambling debts and that medical malpractice lawsuit he's trying to settle quietly. Preston has all the details. Another silence. Madison was realizing that I wasn't the confused old man she thought she could manipulate. How do you... Dad, what have you done? I've done what I should have done years ago. I've stopped enabling your lifestyle and started protecting my assets. Our assets. This is our family money. No, Madison, this is my money that I earned over 35 years of working 60-hour weeks. Money that I've been foolish enough to share with people who treat me like garbage. I hung up and called room service. This is Mr. Pierce. I'd like a Greek salad and iced tea, please. And maybe some of those chocolate-covered strawberries you had yesterday. Certainly, sir. Would you like that served on the balcony? Perfect. While I waited for lunch, I called Preston. Phase 2? He asked. Phase 2. Call Spencer Hayes. It's time. Spencer Hayes isn't just any real estate investor. He specializes in what the industry politely calls distressed properties. When people can't pay their mortgages, when families fall behind on property taxes, when life estates get complicated, Spencer is the man who sorts things out. 6 months ago, I'd sold my house to Spencer's company through that life estate deed. I kept the right to live there until death, but with one crucial condition. If I voluntarily abandoned the property for more than 48 hours, ownership would revert to Spencer immediately. When I threw those keys into the bushes Friday night, I'd started a 48-hour countdown. That countdown would end at 9 p.m. Sunday night. Hayes is ready, Preston reported. He's got the eviction crew on standby. But Wesley, once we do this, there's no going back. Madison will be on the street. I thought about that for a moment. My daughter, homeless. My grandson, sleeping in a car. It should have bothered me more than it did. Preston, Madison is 35 years old. She has a college degree and no physical disabilities. If she ends up on the street, it's because she chose lifestyle over work ethic. That's not my fault anymore. My lunch arrived right on schedule. Perfect Greek salad, fresh iced tea, and strawberries that tasted like summer itself. I ate on the balcony, watching golfers navigate the water hazard on the 16th hole below. My phone had been buzzing constantly with calls and texts from Madison, but I'd turned off the ringer. I didn't need to hear her panic. I could see it clearly enough through the security cameras. By 2 p.m., the house had become unbearable. I watched Madison and Oliver sitting on the tile floor in the kitchen, the coolest spot in the house, fanning themselves with magazines. Griffin was nowhere to be seen. He'd probably walked to a nearby restaurant to escape the heat. At 3 p.m., Madison made a desperate play. She appeared on camera dragging suitcases out of the house. She was trying to pack up the valuable items, jewelry, electronics, artwork, anything she could liquidate quickly. But here's something she didn't know. When Spencer Hayes took possession of the property, everything inside it became part of the asset inventory. The furniture, the electronics, the artwork, even her clothes. Legally, it all belonged to the property management company now. She could take personal items, but anything of significant value would need to be verified as actually belonging to her. And since I'd paid for most of it, verification was going to be a problem. My phone rang at 4 p.m. This time it wasn't Madison. It was Oliver. Grandpa? His voice was small, scared. This was the same kid who'd called Isabella incompetent less than 24 hours ago. Hello, Oliver. Grandpa, it's really hot here. Mom is crying. Can you please come home? For a moment, just a moment, I felt something crack in my chest. This was my grandson, after all. A 16-year-old boy who was paying the price for his parents' greed and stupidity. Oliver, I'm not coming home because it's not my home anymore. In 24 hours, that house is going to belong to someone else. What do you mean? I mean your mother and stepfather have been living in my house, spending my money, and treating me like hired help for years. Now they get to learn what life is like without my support. But what about me? Where am I supposed to go? That was the question that cut deepest. Where was Oliver supposed to go? He was an innocent victim in this family war. Oliver, I said, carefully, your mother has choices to make. She can get a job, find an apartment, and start acting like an adult. Or she can keep expecting other people to solve her problems for her. Either way, that's not my responsibility anymore. But Grandpa, son, listen to me. You're 16 years old. In 2 years, you'll be an adult yourself. What kind of man do you want to be? The kind who treats hardworking people like Isabella with respect? Or the kind who thinks the world owes him something? There was a long pause. I was mean to Isabella. Yes, you were. And that tells me everything I need to know about what kind of values your mother has been teaching you. Sunday evening arrived with the kind of spectacular desert sunset that makes Arizona famous. Orange and purple painted the sky while I sat on my hotel balcony eating perfectly prepared seafood and drinking wine that I'd chosen myself. At exactly 9 p.m., my phone rang. It was Preston. "It's done," he said simply. "Hayes took possession. The family is out." I felt something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, more like completion. "Any problems?" Madison tried to claim squatters' rights, but that was laughable. Griffin was arrested. Arrested? Remember those disappearing funds from your investment accounts? The FBI finished their investigation. Turns out Griffin was running a classic Ponzi scheme with elderly investors. He's been using your money to pay fake returns to earlier victims. They found evidence of embezzlement totaling $180,000. I wasn't surprised. I'd suspected Griffin was stealing from me for months. I'd been keeping detailed records, waiting for law enforcement to build their case. What about Madison and Oliver? They're at a Motel 6 near the highway. Madison applied for 3 retail jobs yesterday. Reality is setting in fast. That night I called Spencer Hayes directly. "Mr. Pierce," Hayes said, "I wanted to thank you personally. That house is a beautiful property. We'll have no trouble placing it with qualified tenants. What about my family's belongings? Per the contract, personal items will be boxed and stored for 30 days. Anything of significant value will require proof of ownership to claim. Since I'd paid for most of their possessions over the years, proof of ownership was going to be complicated for them." 3 months later, I was sitting in the lobby of the St. Regis Aspen, reading the Wall Street Journal and waiting for my real estate agent. I'd flown to Colorado that morning to close on an $800,000 mountain cabin with views of the slopes. After 35 years of medical device sales plus smart investments and life insurance payouts, I was worth $4.2 million. Not billionaire money, but more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Enough to buy that cabin without touching my retirement accounts. Enough to join the country club and play golf with men who understood respect. Enough to take that European river cruise Charlotte and I had always planned. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Madison's number. "Dad, I got a job at Target, 15 an hour. Oliver is working at a pizza place after school. We're trying to save money for an apartment. I know you probably don't care, but I wanted you to know we're working." I stared at that message for a long time. She was right about one thing. She was finally working. At 35 years old, Madison was learning what most people figure out in their 20s, that life requires effort. I typed back, "I'm proud of you for working. That's what adults do." A few minutes later, "Dad, do you think, maybe at Christmas, we could talk?" I thought about that. Christmas was 9 months away. 9 months for Madison to prove that this wasn't just temporary desperation. 9 months to see if she could actually maintain a job, pay her own bills, treat people with respect. 9 months to see if she could become someone worth having a relationship with. "We'll see," I typed back. "Actions matter more than words, Madison. Show me who you really are." I put the phone away and looked out at the snow-covered peaks surrounding Aspen. Tomorrow, I was playing golf with 3 other retirees I'd met at the club. Good men who'd worked hard, saved smart, and understood that respect is earned, not inherited. Next week, I was flying to Amsterdam for that river cruise through Europe. I'd booked the owner's suite and planned to toast Charlotte's memory in every city we visited. You know what I'd learned through all of this? family isn't just about blood. It's about how people treat each other. It's about mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care. For 10 years, I'd been afraid of being alone. I'd tolerated abuse, enabled laziness, and funded my own humiliation because I thought being family meant accepting any behavior. I was wrong. Being alone isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Being disrespected by the people you love most, that's worse. But here's the thing about cutting toxic people out of your life. It creates space for better relationships to grow, space for self-respect, space for joy, space for the kind of peace that money can't buy, but boundaries can create. Madison had called me a spare part. She was wrong about that too. I wasn't spare anything. I was the engine that had powered their lifestyle for nearly a decade. And when you remove the engine, everything else stops working. The mountain air was clean and cold, full of possibilities. I had decades of life ahead of me, decades to spend with people who valued my company, who appreciated my contributions, who understood that respect flows both ways. I'd spent $3.2 million buying my freedom from that family. It was the best investment I ever made. Some lessons cost money to learn, but the expensive ones tend to stick.